now that you've had some time to go through the memorial, and now it's going to be awkward for everybody and not just for me, what did it make you think or feel? Anybody want to say anything about it?
Loneliness.
Sorry?
Loneliness.
Loneliness.
Yeah.
Okay. Why did it make you feel lonely?
I don't know, because there was so much free space, everything was gray, you didn't get to hear anything, everything was quiet, it was like feeling lonely, I think.
Anybody else want to say what it made them feel?
It's suddenly overwhelming.
Okay. So loneliness, being overwhelmed, all of this could be interpretations of what this memorial is about. The truth is that we don't really know. The artist, Peter Eisenman, was incredibly vague about what he wanted this memorial to represent. The only interpretation that he has accepted or that he has been comfortable with is that it's supposed to make you feel something, and that the memorial is about what it makes you feel, whatever that may be. What we can say for certain about it is that it was inaugurated in 2005. It consists of 2,711 concrete blocks of varying sizes, and that the reason why there are 2,711 of them, it's because that is the number of pages in the original Torah, the sacred book of Judaism. As you can see, this memorial is incredibly visible. It is smack in the middle of the city. It is very near to Brandenburg Gate, to Potsdamer Platz, one of the city's financial centers. It's very close also to a residential area. It's in the middle of Berlin. And this is no coincidence. This was a very conscious decision made by the German people to commemorate this darkest time in their history in a very visible way. The Germans are probably the people of the country that face these dark times in their history in the most upfront way. Many countries, I would dare say all countries, have dark periods in their history, but very, very few confront them with as much openness as the German people do. Incredible story that I found out recently about this memorial is that the concrete blocks, they're covered with anti-graffiti spray. It was very important that the blocks could not be vandalized. They have been a couple of times though, but a conscious effort is made with this spray to prevent vandalism from occurring. However, the project came suddenly to a halt at one point in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, when the council that oversaw the construction of this memorial realized that the company that had been commissioned to create this spray had also been commissioned by the Nazi Party to provide gas for gas chambers in concentration camps. This, of course, provoked public outrage, and the construction was halted at a point, and a new company had to be commissioned to do this. I think it's fair to say for obvious reasons. Okay. Underneath this memorial, there is a museum. The Museum of the Jewish Victims of the Holocaust, and it can be found. The entrance of it can be found at the far side of the memorial. And I've been to dozens of museums in Berlin, and I can honestly say this is the most sentimental one and the most human one, because it makes a very big effort to put faces and stories on these numbers that we've all heard through our entire lives. 6 million Jews, 11 million victims. Imagine, try to mention what 6 million people means. Berlin is a city of 3.9 million inhabitants. Imagine that every person whose paths you've crossed today, or in the days that you have been and will be here in Berlin, is dead. And then double that number. And then triple that number. And now you're scratching the surface of the amount of people that were murdered during the Holocaust. It's very abstract when we refer to these people with these numbers. So the museum under this memorial has really made an effort to put human faces and stories on these numbers, and it's honestly terrifying. But it is free, and it is worth it if you really want to see this human face of one of the world's most terrible tragedies. Okay, everybody, what do you see around here?
Trees.
Trees,
Cars.
buildings, nothing too exciting, right? Believe it or not, we are currently standing on top of what was once Hitler's bunker, the bunker of the German Chancellery, which used to be all around us. Right here, on top of the ground, was the garden of the Chancellery. And this is a very good place to make the point of how differently Germany remembers the victims of the war and the perpetrators of the war. We were just at the Jewish Memorial where we could see how the victims are remembered and how this is present in everyday life and in German history. Whereas this, the place where Hitler lived his last days, is a place with nothing remarkable on it. It's a very good way of signaling that we don't want these people to be remembered. Hitler entered the Chancellery bunker on January 1945. He only resurfaced a couple of times, the last of which was on his birthday, and then he went back into this bunker, married Eva Braun, his lover, and on the 30th of April 1945 committed suicide. He and his wife took a pill of cyanide, and then Hitler, to make sure that the job was done, shot himself in the head. The 2nd of May 1945, only a few days after, Berlin fell to Soviet occupation. The Battle of Berlin was the second bloodiest battle of the entire war, the first one being the Battle of Stalingrad. This, if you can imagine it, was 2.5 million Soviet soldiers versus shy of 400,000 Nazi soldiers. More was destroyed of Berlin in the 2 weeks that this battle lasted than in the previous 4 years of Allied bombings. Of course, while this was happening and Hitler was hiding in his bunker, he was quite literally going crazy. It is said that at some point he started commandeering and moving troops that only existed at that point in the map. When he realized that all was lost was when he finally committed suicide, like I mentioned. Recently, but not long before that, Mussolini had also fallen, and the news of what had happened to his remains, dragged on the streets of Milan and hung on a public square for all to see, terrified Hitler. So in his last will and testament, he explained that he wanted his remains to be burned. However, it is said, but this part of the story gets a little fuzzy, that when the soldiers, the Nazi soldiers, were carrying out Hitler's wish and burning his remains, they didn't have enough time to do it. They were under heavy Soviet attack at the time, and the remains were not completely burned. It is said that Soviet soldiers took these remains, who found they didn't know who they belonged to at the time. They were sent to Moscow, and they were recognized to be Hitler's. After this, the remains were taken to a city not far from here called Magdeburg. They were buried, and a couple of decades later, exhumed, burned, and thrown to the river. This is what the official history tells us. However, as you are probably familiar with, there are all sorts of stories around Hitler's death. That he's not really dead, that he's in Argentina with Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. This is all speculation. Michael Jackson is probably there, maybe with his baby. This is all speculation. What official history tells us is the story that I just told you. As you can see, and like we were mentioning before, nothing around here reminds us of that era. Nothing around here lets you know that once the Chancellery stood in this grounds, that Hitler died in this place. And why do you think that is? Well, to not make it a big deal. To not make it a big deal, yes. To avoid the rallies here, neo-Nazis, essentially to prevent this from becoming a place of worship. Because yes, there are still people in the world that consider this man and his work to be something that should be remembered. Germany strongly disagrees, and this is what it has made of the place where Hitler lived its last days.
I have
Do you have a question? Yes?
Yes, if I may. Did the German government tore down the buildings here? Were they bombed? Why is there anything else here?
The buildings were initially bombed during the Allied air raids. Afterwards, this was actually part of the Soviet-occupied Berlin. We'll get to that a little bit later. And the remains that were still standing by the time the Soviets occupied this part of town were demolished. The bunker was flooded, it was bombed, and now nothing remains of what was once this bunker. It's not like where there could be an excavation, it's just not there anymore.
Thanks.
Welcome. Seemingly unimportant, rather ugly building is actually the last standing Nazi structure in Berlin, like built during the Nazi era. There are a few other buildings outside of Berlin, but this is the only one in the capital city. This building was commissioned in 1933 by Adolf Hitler himself and inaugurated in 1935 as the headquarters of the Luftwaffe, the very feared army of the air of the Germans. However, when it was first inaugurated, it was inaugurated under the name of the Ministry for Civil Aviation, because at the time, in 1935, it was a breach of contract for Germany to have an army. Can anybody think of a treaty that they might be violating at the time by creating an army? Somebody over there, yes. The Treaty of Versailles, which Germany signed after being defeated in World War I, did not allow Germany from creating an air force. However, as we all know, from the time that Hitler came into power in 1933, he was preparing for war. So even though he was in breach of the Treaty of Versailles, he started building this air force, which was headquartered right here. Curiously enough, this building was not bombed by the Allied air raids. There are many theories as to why. One says that it's because they used it to as a point of location. Some others believe it's because they thought there would be important information, important documents inside this building, so it was worth preserving. Others believe it was a matter of inaccuracy. At the time, if a bomb dropped 5 kilometers from the intended target, the hit was considered successful. So there could be many reasons why this building is still standing. The fact remains, it's the last standing Nazi building in the country. Of course, right now it's not in the country. I'm sorry, in the city. Of course, right now it's not the headquarters of the Luftwaffe, but it's also something that Germans quite that can be disliked. It's the Ministry of Finance. So it's basically a tax collection office, among other things, which nobody really likes. One of the most important things to take place in this building, other than, of course, the instructions of the hard bombings that took place during the World War II, such as the bombing of Guernica, was the creation of the Democratic Republic of Germany, which was created from this building in the 7th of October of 1949.